Hey guys, my name is Goro Fujita, and in this video I wanted to cover how to optimize your Quill projects so you can upload them to Oculus Media Studio. This is my Oculus Media Studio library, and for example, if you click on the Viking Rockstar here and I go to the media description page, this is the page you can share on social media, and people that have VR headsets, they can save to VR, and then it will appear in the save section in Quill Theater. But how do you get here? In order to be able to share your content, it has to be mobile ready. So I want to cover optimization techniques, and first I want to go over the performance panel. So the performance panel shows three different categories. So basically memory, draw calls, triangles throughout the scene. So draw calls are basically whenever you create a new layer or you have like different brushes that you use. Memory is the overall file size. So 1 GB is kind of the limit that you should not go over. And then triangles is the number of polygons. Right. So first of all, memory is actually self-explanatory. It will increase as you have more and more polygons. Draw calls, however, for example, if you have like a paint layer here, you paint something, the draw call goes up. If you duplicate this layer, you get like a second draw call. All right. So as you also use different brushes, for example, I use the flat brush, and this one you can see it goes up as well. So if I delete this layer again and create a new paint layer, for each different brush stroke here, some of them are created the same way, so they wouldn't count, but if I use this cube brush, you will see this is already 4 draw calls. So it's recommended if you have like many layers that you try to use like, not to use like crazy different brushes, because what happens is if you duplicate a lot of these, see how the draw call go up, like they skyrocket, right? So you're almost reaching the limit. So if I go further up, like yellow means that it's probably still compatible, but it's not guaranteed. So you want to always stay in the green area. If you duplicate more at some point over 65 draw calls, you won't be able to make it compatible for mobile. So it won't let you upload to Quest either. So basically, to reduce the draw calls, you can always merge layers, right? So if you merge them all to one, you're back down to 4 draw calls. So this is like one thing you can do. And triangles, if you duplicate this around, you will see that the triangles count goes up exponentially. So I'm just gonna duplicate this. And then it's like at 1 million, and then anything beyond 1.2 million will turn red. So here, if you slide this over, you can see the layer count, the stroke count, and the poly count here as well, which is like equivalent with what it's showing here. If you don't see it, you can go into your options here and turn on show stroke count and paint layers. So now to reduce this, there's also one thing we can do is like in the brush panel, there's a optimization tool. So you can just change the strength here with the gradient and say like optimize current layer or optimize all layers. So if you optimize current layer, you will see you're back in the yellows with like 760,000 polygons. So what that does is like if you have like a curve like this, and then you optimize it at maximum, you will see that it will remove these vertices, right? So there's also like a shortcut, Control M. Let me draw it in orange and hit Control M. And then you see like actually the vertices underneath. So when I optimize it by, let's say 50%, you can see how much it removes, right? And there's like also a little button here to go through this wireframe mode. So you can actually, without the shortcut, you can just do it here. So this will show you the amount of polygons, right? So it's recommended if you, for example, do buildings, if you do buildings like this, if you use like straight line tool and stuff like that, you can actually optimize it all the way, boom. And it will look the same. Just be careful when you want to colorize it with like a nice gradient or something. then do it before you optimize it. Because then, if you optimize it after, it will try to maintain the gradient, so it will put a little bit more vertices where the transitions are. So this way you can optimize things without worrying about losing the gradient, right? Because otherwise, if you have something like this, you optimize it first for maximum, and then you colorize it. You kind of colorize the whole thing. See? Let me use green. It starts colorizing the whole thing without, like, you can't do the gradient. So just be aware of that, and also always only optimize before you export or before you upload, because that's like you don't want to lose data. So make sure the optimization pass comes last. But it's always good to test and keep things small as you can. One little tip, for example, if you have something like this and something like this, and you only want to optimize this one, let's say you have a bunch of these layers. Oops, let me do this. You have a bunch of these layers, and you do not want to optimize this one. You can actually lock it and say, okay, I want to optimize everything else, so optimize all layers, boom. It will not affect the locked layers. So if you, for example, have characters that you don't want to optimize, then you can just quickly lock. It works for folders as well. And then you can hit like optimize all layers. And then here in the optimization panel, you see that you have 8 draw calls and only 1.9K polygons. Apart from that, there's like things to watch out for. So one thing is bounding boxes for precision, because when you upload to Media Studio, your Quill project gets compressed at cost of precision, kind of like the JPEG format in 2D. So the problem is, for example, if you have like a ground plane like this, let me turn off the wireframe here, a ground plane like this, and then you have like, for example, like small detail, something like this, on the same layer, like that. Now the bounding box for this one, if you turn this on, you see that the bounding box is large. So let's see, even if I do this, the bounding box gets like super large, right? So then the precision on this level of detail here could suffer. So when you see it in Quill Theater, you might see that these like shifted in space, or like they're not visible or something like that. If that happens, it's usually because you have small detail in a super large bounding box. To reduce that amount, the precision issues, what you can do is just select it, separate it into a new layer. So now the bounding box for the detail stays small, right? So rule of thumb, try to keep the bounding boxes as tight as possible while also keeping the draw call count low. So in this case, I can actually, the ideal case here would be that each plane here would be in its own bounding box. Just like this. So if I turn on all the bounding boxes, you see the bounding boxes are fairly tight. So if I had, like, for example, this guy, and I have like built like a cube like this is fine, right? This is like a nice tight bounding box. So what I can do is like I can just merge them so they become one, right? So this is actually an okay bounding box. The worst thing is if you have something like this, if you have, like, for example, the detail layer. Where's my detail layer? Let me find my detail layer. Is it this? Yeah, this. And then you have like a line somewhere in space here. See, like this bounding box becomes unnecessarily big, and you will most certainly get precision issues here. So this is something to look out for, to keep the bounding boxes tight, but also realize that you will increase draw call count as you have more layers. Another thing to watch out for is, even if your poly count is low, it can be that you have a lot of overdraws, and that usually happens when you have something like grass, right? So if you have something like grass and you have, and this is really like to make it mobile compatible. On the Rift, it's usually not a problem unless you have an older graphic card. But like, for example, if you have like a grass field like this, the overlaps are called overdraws. So there's like a lot of overlaps. So this will also affect the frame rate on the Quest. So make sure, even if I'm like way in the greens here, everywhere, this might not run at performance on mobile. because it has to calculate all those overlaps, right? And to reduce the amount of overlaps, what I usually do is I only, like, let's say there's a character here. There's a character here. I usually only reduce the detail to where the character is, and then the rest is kind of like, let me put that on a new layer. The rest is kind of like just really rough brush strokes here. Duplicate this around, and then I just have some grass bits here and there to indicate that the grass field is going further than it is. So this way, you avoid, you have the most concentration of overdraws here where it's important, and the rest is fairly simple. So this is something you can do to reduce the overdraws. So this is also something to look out for when you make things mobile compatible. Even if you're in the greens and you test it on the Quest, it might not run at performance, so make sure to check if you have like crazy amount of strokes and overlaps. That also means if you have something like this, right, like a lot of strokes, and then you do something like this, now you have like a lot of unnecessary overlaps as well, right? So be careful of that. Another thing is transparency. So transparency gives you probably like a 10% performance hit usually, and it actually, transparency on Rift has 8 steps, on the Quest it has only 4 steps, so it's not gonna look as great. So even if it looks good on the Rift here, it might not look nice on the Quest. So rule of thumb, try to avoid it where you can, and if you need to make it look like this is going into the fog and stuff like that, don't use transparency for it. Use actually real color for it and colorize it like this and create an illusion that it's going transparent, right? And if you have, for example, like a reflection of a character, so let's say this is like the character and you have a reflection, instead of putting like a plane in there, what many people usually do, they put a plane in there, let me put this on an extra layer, and then they reduce the transparency. It's better to fake the transparency by changing, let me put this on an extra layer, by actually reducing the contrast by painting over it. So maybe something like this. And then we animate the reflection, like 13 frames or something. Use the nudge tool and do this. And now this is how you can do like a simple reflection without actually putting like a real water surface in there. So this is like a little trick you can do as well. So there's a lot of like other recommendations here. So make sure you read all of these things. Like there's like very useful tips that you can do to make things mobile compatible. And as I said before, let me see where the grass layer is. So everything in the green, it should be fine as long as you don't have like crazy overdraws like this right now, right? But as you go forward and forward and forward, you will see it goes to a yellow area. Yellow means this will definitely not perform, actually, even if it's in the greens, and this is because of the overdraws. So this is something to keep in mind. But if you have like a pretty complex scene, you will see how fast you will get in the yellow zone, and then you can always say like, hey, I want to optimize my scene, optimize all layers, boom, and you have a lot of real estate yet again. For more complex scenarios, like you actually have like a little analyze button that will analyze your entire scene, and it will always measure for your worst case scenario, so you don't have to worry about if it shows everything in green, that means that your whole scene will be performant. So this is like a quick intro for the optimization tool, and now I want to cover a few more things how you can optimize your scene properly, and like useful tricks that you can do. So sometimes you want to create like a textured ground, right? Like you want to have like a lot of like, let me create a paint layer here, and you want to create like a nice textured ground, like let's say dirt ground or something. Like this is like blue now, let's say this is an ocean or something like this, and then you duplicate this stuff around because you want to have texture, right? Let's say this is like an ocean or something like that, or maybe like a textured wall or something. So, and then you can colorize it, right? It's really nice. You can colorize it, something like this. Let me remove this here. Okay, so what you can do now, this is already 250,000 polygons, right? And if I increase this now, let's say I want a more detailed texture here, something like this, then we're already at 1 million polygons. But it's not necessary to make it this big, right? So ideally, we want to reduce the number because this is just a textured surface. So what can we do? We can actually take a screenshot. So let me go to screenshot and take like a 2K 1:1 capture. Make sure to push it far away and like change the focal length here to like something like 68 millimeters, like maximum. And then I frame this entire thing and take a screenshot. Boom. So now I took a screenshot and then I bring this in as a image layer. So now I have this image layer, see? And it's basically as nice as, or even nicer, because it doesn't have a gap, right? So I'm gonna get rid of this, and you see now it's reduced to one draw call. So this is like pretty cool. So you can put this here, and if you want to align it perfectly to the grid, you can have the transform, layer transform here on, and say reset transform, and that should, yeah, okay, reset transform, and that should rotate the, put it into the 0 position, and now you can rotate it with the index finger trigger alongside the x-axis, and then you will make sure that this is like perfectly parallel to the grid on the ground. Now each layer will be a draw call, but because these are just 2 polygons, it's not going to be as processor heavy, so it's a little bit more forgiving. But you see now I have like a very like dense and textured surface done in Quill with millions of polygons, back in Quill with 16 polygons and 4 draw calls only. So this is like a really, really cool way to reduce like complicated stuff. For example, if you have something like graffiti, you know, so you have like graffiti on here, you know, boom, and like, let's say you have like detailed graffiti, you could just take a picture of that and then bring it back in as a texture. But you can also just bring in Photoshop textures and stuff like that, what you create. Also, Quill does support PNG with alphas, but again, it looks nice on the Rift, but for Quest, I would not recommend to bring in stuff for transparency if it's avoidable, because it usually has some aliasing issues and stuff like that where it flickers and it doesn't look too great. So another thing you can do is, like, for example, I showed this technique in the past where you do like a nice little, let me create a new layer here, where you create like this background dome for the sky dome. So I use the lathe technique, duplicate, 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 duplicate. So it comes around, there we go. And then I create like a little gradient at the bottom. And then you get like this super cool sky dome, like this. So you have like this nice gradient, and let me create some clouds. So some clouds. I'm gonna do it like really quick, and then place them all over the place. So maybe, let me bring this down. Let me put the clouds on an extra layer actually. So I'm gonna put them on an extra layer, bring the opacity down here, and then I'm just gonna populate the sky with clouds. So I'm not gonna spend too much time in it because it's just to show you guys the concept of it, what you can do. So let's say we have like clouds like this, right? and then you're in here. And let's say you did like a super crazy detailed sky. So you're already at 83,000 polygons. What you can do is you do the similar thing. You go to capture, but this time instead of 2D, you capture 360 mono. Phase size 2K is good. Start capture. Put it into the center and hit capture. Save to disk. And then the same thing, you go in here, but instead of 2D image, you bring it in as an equirectangular mono, and it's the equirectangular map here, select. And what you get is like this little sphere, all right? So now you have like the sphere, you can do the same thing, hit reset transform, it goes straight into the middle, and then you can do something like this, and then replace, delete all of this. And now I have the ground, which I can scale up to, so it goes to the edge of the sphere. Something like this. And look, I have 3K polygons because it's a sphere, but only 2 draw calls. And I have already like a quill sky and a textured ground. So these are little tricks you can do, like most certainly the equirectangular trick with the 360. You can definitely do this for like far away backgrounds, kind of like matte paintings. If you want to change the style of what you imported, so you can always change it to like a 2D image or something, and then you will see that the image looks like this, right? And then you can make it back to an equirectangular image as well. But this is how you can drastically reduce your level of detail without losing the actual feel of it. Obviously, this trick doesn't work for things that are close by. That's something you guys have to know. It's like, and then if you want to only take a picture of the sky, make sure you hide the ground, obviously. Right, but this is like how you can really reduce the amount of geometry and make things extremely performant. So as for sound layers, those are not draw calls, so you don't have to worry about it. But I think the limit of sounds is somewhere around 256 or something like that. Make sure you read all those things and try to avoid transparency and use these tricks to get as much detail as you can by not even having a crazy amount of polygons. That's it for optimization.